me just check to see whether the technology is working. I think the presentation is on now. Thank you very much for joining me.
Most of us who do Sage CRM developers are not coders by background. I know that some of us have been through IT courses at university and college, and there will be quite a few of us who have been focused on coding development right from the get-go. But most people are not experts in coding, but instead have expertise in other areas such as the installation and configuration of the accounting system. If they're relatively new to Sage CRM, they're going to have existing skills, and they're likely to have very solid skills in analysis and business consultancy. And these are all skills that allow customer needs to be fully understood. I get the impression from the dealings that I work with when I'm working with partners is the majority of business partners typically also find themselves performing multiple day-to-day roles, and that's going to be reflected as well if you're a customer as well. You're going to be pulled in multiple directions with an organization, so you may find yourself, if you're a partner, creating a demo one day, installing Sage CRM the next, and then logging a support call the day after. If you're within the organization as a customer, you may well find yourself doing training one day. You may find yourself logging and interacting with the partner, trying to get to grips with what the problem is that you may face within an implementation. Now, I for this presentation, I've been thinking about the typical problems that a customer may face when working with a system that has been in place for a while. Now, imagine you're a relatively new member of the team, and that's either a new member of the team from the partner's perspective or a new member of the team from the customer's perspective. So you're new into the IT role. Not new to the skills, but new to the role. Some of the but the implementation is going to be new to you, and these are just some of the challenges that a consultant may face when familiarizing themselves with a system. The first thing is that systems are not static. They exist in an upgrade path. They're always going to be changing. They're always going to be moving on. And people change as well. So you're going to find, looking at the code, if there's either ASP pages and the JavaScript that's within the system, or you inherit the assembly and the raw code for that, you may well find that the existing code is not documented. There are no assumptions stated about what a particular bit of code is supposed to be doing, what problem it's getting around. You may find that you have a chunk of code that doesn't have the business purpose explained. What business logic is this trying to be able to do? Or it's just grown without thought, so it's complex, it's disorganized. It may find that the customization lacks any sense of consistency or conventions, whether it's you're thinking about the camel case type code, or whether however you group and logically construct functions within the code or objects within the code. And you may also have the problem that you find yourself suddenly working with something like an assembly built using the .NET API, and you can't find the source files for that, or just the awfulness of the fact that you didn't make the changes, so you don't know what the code is supposed to be doing, and you don't know enough about how a business rule straddles the script that you may find and any metadata definitions within the screens. A lot of these problems that you may experience are simply down to the fact that they creep in because projects keep on growing. A little bit of code is added here, and then a little bit more, and then some more, and before you know it, you actually end up with an unmanageable beast that has grown beyond the understanding of the person who's next required to edit the code. And some of the problems are very specific to the way in which Sage CRM allows business rules to be developed. You're going to possibly face a challenge to track down issues across, whether it's in the database or whether it's in ASP pages, whether it's in the .NET file, whether or not with this in, say, the JavaScript files. And if you've then got integration or a third-party component installed, then unpicking and editing that itself can be a pain. Now, if you are coming into a system for the new time, then the first thing that needs to be done, and I hope actually if you find yourself working with the new system, there is a handover period where you get all this given to you so you understand the caretaking that has to be done. But really, if I find myself being exposed to a system for the first time, the first thing that I want to do is to take stock. And in an ideal world, there should be a full service history of the customer implementation. That should be available. And that should be everything from the initial project documents to the ones, and these are the ones that are supposed to describe the scope of the customization, the business rules and the workflows that were supposed to be implemented. And there should also exist follow-up documents that describe any later customizations and changes that have been made. Change control is one of my hobby horses, and actually thinking, and it's going to come clear in this presentation that that's one of the things that I want people to understand is that they're developing a legacy. That means that as somebody who's coming after them needs to be able to work with this system. So CRM systems are, they're pivotal systems for an organization. They are full operational systems. You're talking as long lasting as an accounting system. And if you're lucky, your project is going to have updated versions of the screen customization guide, data management forms, the data model that you're using on, or whatever is the equivalent that your methodology uses. And now, depending on what you want, you may actually find these up on the community, raw documents that you can use there. That's, for example, some example data management forms that you could use, an example of a data model that you could then take away and think about, what do I need to do to document my system? And you need as well to understand what documentation is available just basically from the help center, which is where all of our system documentation can be found. And that will describe, if you like, the base system, especially in a system that has existed for some time. So Sage CRM is an enormously plastic system. So it's very, very easily changed. You're going to have probably in an environment where the system is used for a while, you're not always going to have a nice, clear, iterative process. System administrators just go in and make changes. Consultants make ad hoc changes, and this causes the system to drift away from any original definition that you may have had. And it can be a profoundly unsettling experience to discover that a system is documented to have one set of customization, but in reality it may have a different set of configuration and customizations as well. So you do, if you're working with the system for the first time, you do need to gather all the documents. You can need to make sure that you have read and understood what the system was originally like. But when you're facing a system that has going to be upgraded or has been upgraded, or you're going to face an extension to the system, then you need to know what the system is really like now, and so what changes have been made. And to do that, you need to create this, I call this the baseline. You need to understand how does this differ from an original vanilla system of the system of an implementation. Now, if you were to install a brand new empty system, how does that compare with your existing system? And we know that Sage CRM is a metadata-driven system. Hopefully you know that metadata actually controls everything about the user experience for Sage CRM. So who can access the system? What can they access? When do things happen? When can people access behavior? And where are different aspects of the system that make up the extended environment stored, so documents, etc. So you can examine you can examine the metadata to see which screens, lists and fields have been added and which have been changed or had scripts or rules added to them, and where in fact calls to extensions like ASP pages and .NET pages have been added into the environment as well. Now, there are tools to help us understand a system and really understand it so we can support it. I've previously published a small collection of SQL scripts that I use to investigate changes between a vanilla database and a customized database. Now you can find the latest set that I create, and I update every few versions. You can find a latest set of SQL scripts used to investigate changes in the database up on the community, so community.sagecrm.com. Now those example scripts will report names of any new interactive dashboards that have been added in, new gadgets that have been added in, new reports that have been added into the system, new system actions used in the interface, any foreign key constraints that have been added into the database, any tables, views, fields dropped from the system, or any additional structures inside your system compared with the vanilla implementation, and then any new system parameters that might have been implemented, any new workflows that have been implemented. So all of this helps us go towards creating a baseline. Now, those scripts that I provide are only examples of how you can use SQL to investigate the changes made to a system. You can expand those to cover all aspects of the system. And once you have your baseline and you are secure in your understanding of the state of the system, that is, you're confident that you understand how its business rules work and the extent of the existing customization, then you can then go on and understand or have a good idea of what any further changes to the system would what implications any further changes would have. Now, we do have to think about environmental changes as well. Sage CRM exists in an environment that has many different elements. So you've got the browser, the server software, the office software, even that you're working with, even the database version that may move. And for each version of Sage CRM that you're using, you need to make sure that you've got hold of the system requirements document and any release, and if there has been a patch, what patch notes for each version. They become all essential reading for us, and this is really not something that we can avoid. Now, if we are working within a project environment, it's a myth to say that Sage CRM projects are intrinsically hard. They are not, but they do require different thinking, if you like, from, say, an accounting system implementation. So there's nothing intrinsically difficult within if you're implementing Sage CRM. The actual installation of sales and the marketing and customer service modules is very, very straightforward. But if you're going to implement Sage CRM successfully, especially in the context of an integrated environment, then you need to be prepared in a very disciplined way in the way in which you approach every part of the project. And that's and this presentation is all about Not so much troubleshooting. I give the title troubleshooting, but I really want to think about how we avoid having to actually carry out troubleshooting. It's trouble avoidance is what I want to do. And we can avoid trouble from the very start. How we initiate a project, how we plan the actions to be carried out, and then how we execute those actions. They all require a very strong control of the project, and that implies that you can't do CRM in a half-hearted way, because you build in risk then into that project. So let's be clear about project expectations, how you measure your achievements for any project goals, and what are going to be the success criteria for a project. And just as a word of warning, really, or just a thought process about project management and anything that we're doing here, the Sage CRM project involves essentially three key elements. What have we got to do within the project? That's the scope. How much time do we have to do it? That's the time. And how much money is available to do it? That's the cost. Anyone who works with Sage CRM for any length of time realizes that these factors, scope, time, and cost, are interrelated constraints that have to be monitored. A change in one immediately affects the other. All of these constraints combine to influence the central experience of the system, which is the quality of the implementation. So you can't go changing one without changing the others. They all compete against each other. So if you increase the scope, if you add more features, that typically means increased time and cost. If you're making changes about the way in which workflows use, or extending Sage CRM to cover new entities, or deciding to use the advanced email manager as an example feature to process inbound communications, this will all by necessity require more thought, more time to design, implement and test. And if you've got a tight time constraint, that could also mean that you've got increased costs, so adding more people to get the job done on time, or you actually have to reduce the scope of the project. You take elements out which aren't going to be used within the first phase of the project. And each of these, so if you've got a tight budget as well, so you've got you hit all the aspects of those. Now, if these three constraints, scope, time and cost, certainly impact quality, and inversely, changing the quality constraint can affect the other constraints. For example, increasing the required quality level for the project can put demands on cost and time, and that's really the amount of time that you spend on the testing and insurance of this. Quality within the context of a CRM project is not about whether a feature works typically or not, but how the user experiences the system, and that might mean the performance. What is the screen design correct? Is the layout of the fields on the screen correct? Does it make sense for a user? Sorry about the noise there, but you can hear this is live, and I can't do anything about the working from home environment there. But it makes sense that so user experience is at the heart of really everything that we do with Sage CRM. I mentioned risk. I mentioned risk in projects, and you need to think carefully about the risk involved in each part of working with a system. Now imagine that we are approaching really implementation of a system. You can approach the implementation of Sage CRM with an integrated system as a big bang, or a series of phased or even parallel projects. So a phased project offers certainly the best approach where professional services resources are scarce and you wish to minimize the risk at the same time as being able to demonstrate a clear benefit for the system. So a phased approach could see the different modules of Sage CRM each being rolled out across a customer's organization in a sequence. One of the advantages of doing a sequential or phased adoption is that it allows the project team to learn from each part of the process. So the team becomes better at understanding the amount of work that has to be done for each phase. And if you have smaller phases, that allows for better estimation and baselining of every subsequent phase, and it also allows you to catch your assumptions, which can be an important part of avoiding any problems within the code. This is all about really trouble avoidance rather than troubleshooting. Now, here are some of the tips that I use when I plan my own projects and maintain the different components that are updated and re-released for each new version of Sage CRM. Now, it's essentially a list of ideas rather than a to-do list of actions that should be followed prescriptively. Now, so these tips are going to be useful, I think, not just for Sage CRM projects, but they could also be applied for any use with Sage implementation or Sage software as well. Now, proper preparation prevents poor performance. This is really thinking about our experience of how do we approach that implementation of Sage CRM. I'll come on to that, but I'll come on to something in a moment, which is really to do with knowledge. What is your baseline knowledge of CRM? In understanding the system, you can actually avoid having to do any code because there is a very, very rich environment. So the first aspect is to think no code and to think low code. The second is to think carefully about the API that you use. One of the awfulnesses that you may have is that if you're used to writing things in one language, you may just keep on writing in that language, even though that Sage CRM has a language, has that API that you choose, but it's not necessarily the right tool for the job. And it's a true saying to say that if the only tool that you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail, and you want to be able to think carefully about the API that you're going to use. You certainly want to avoid making direct manual changes to metadata and to the registry, so using the interface as much as possible. That also makes sure that any of the internal rules that we carry out that Sage CRM has are going to be properly maintained and used. Now, when it comes to probably the greatest tip is to think about the person who's going to maintain your system. I mentioned that you're building a legacy. This is something that is going to carry on into the person who comes after you. Make sure that you comment your code, carry out customization reviews, be prepared to refactor, upgrade. So you may have, imagine the situation where you have got a module of code that is doing something, but actually Sage CRM has changed its features so that is now automatically done. Think about the way in which you can automate repetitive tasks. Think about the way in which you can divide up the code into little modules so that they are easier to maintain. Now, I've mentioned in that whole idea of proper preparation, we need to make sure that we have the right skills. And a precursor skill to avoid any problems with implementation is to make sure that you know Sage CRM inside and out. And this is because you want to make sure that if you're going to use a feature of Sage CRM, then make sure that you use it and its associated design. It's associated design to the best advantage possible. And it's a really bad thing to find yourself reinventing the wheel by implementing a change using some code, and the capability is actually built into Sage CRM out of the box. So not just look at what's in the code, but read around it. Look around here, make sure you've looked at all of the different videos that are on the YouTube channel. Have a look as well on Sage City, read the blogs, make sure that you spend time continually checking your knowledge about Sage CRM and its technology. And so this allows you to revise your knowledge, and there are lots of short videos to help you do this. Now, I know that there's lots of details that needs to be considered before you carry out any customization. So you also need to agree how customizations are going to be carried out by a team. You need to establish your coding standards and naming conventions. You need to think about how customization fits together into the existing systems, what screens and structures, etc. are used. And here I'm thinking about how fields and screens flow together. By spending time ahead of any coding and any customization, by thinking and planning what needs to be done, you're going to save time within a project, and you're also going to avoid the need to do extensive troubleshooting because of inappropriate assumptions that don't have to be reworked. So I hope that that's been a useful introduction to you to the idea of managing systems in a way, managing implementations and implementations of Sage CRM in a way that we actually design out a lot of the problems that we would run into when it came to an upgrade or when we come into working with a new integration. I probably would say that the takeaway from all of that is to make sure that your base knowledge of CRM is good, so that you actually know what to expect and what not to expect. And actually, even if you're a technical person, then I would emphasize that you've got to make sure you understand the basic features of Sage CRM. Anyway, I hope that that was a useful session to you. There's loads more. I know my colleagues are talking about specific debugging and issues associated with scaling up and working in the cloud and things like that in the conference. So enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks. Bye-bye.